Good morning and welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor's virtual Sunday service. We are coming to you live this morning, which means there may be minor little hiccups and unpredictable things that happen when we are live together. And I want to thank you in advance for your graciousness as we move through this time together today. It is my privilege and pleasure to serve our community as its senior minister. We are a progressive, liberal, spiritual, ethically oriented community located in Southeast Michigan. We have been together Sunday after Sunday since 1865, bringing alive in our spirit, in our work together as community, the hopes, dreams, and values of liberal religion. It's in that spirit we welcome you this morning from wherever you may be joining us, whether it's in Southeast Michigan itself, elsewhere in the state, elsewhere in our nation, or even the world. We are glad you've chosen to be with us today. This particular Sunday, we gather to honor and commemorate a particular time in our community's history that's linked closely to our community's history. 88 years ago, around this time of year, in 1933, the first Humanist Manifesto was published. It was released. A document that defines what religious humanism was going to mean for then Unitarians, today Unitarian Universalists. It's in that spirit that I'm delighted to share with you that we have a very special guest with us who'll be sharing perspectives on humanism in today's service, Anthony Cruz. I'll say more about Anthony as our service progresses. For now, I want to invite you to, as we deepen this time together, to hear some words of centering and grounding in advance of our chalice lighting and covenant sharing this morning. This is from the preamble of the Humanist Manifesto of 1933. I invite you to find a place of centering as we hear these words together. Religions have always been a means for realizing the highest values of life. Their end has been accomplished through the interpretation of the total environment, the sense of values resulting therefrom, and the techniques established for realizing the satisfactory life. A change in any of these factors results in an alteration of the outward forms of religion. This fact explains the changefulness of religions through centuries. But through all the changes themselves, religion remains constant in its quest for abiding values, an inseparable feature of human life. It's in that spirit that we gather today as forebearers from our own congregation and the University of Michigan were ancestors, forerunners in the development of this thinking, of the constant evolution of spiritual ethical thinking, that we join together today in that spirit. There's a phrase that Karl Barth popularized in 1947, semper reformanda. The spirit of religious and ethical life is constantly evolving, constantly learning and growing. Formed by the past, looking to the needs of our time, we build together for tomorrow. In that spirit, we gather together as community Sunday after Sunday, offering together our words of our chalice lighting, our ingathering as a community. If you have a chalice at home, I invite you at this time to take a moment. Let's light it together, and you may join me as I light mine from the congregation. Let us say our words together. We light this chalice for the light of truth. We light this chalice for the warmth of love. We light this chalice for the energy of action. And we light this chalice for the harmony of peace. May it always be so. As we gather, we are a community not defined by creed, the imposition of belief upon one another, but rather by the promises we make to one another as we are together in community. We call these shared promises our covenant. If you would join me as we offer together once again the words of our community's covenant, offered in love and care for one another, in commitment to the good work that we seek to do. The spirit of this church is love, and service is its law. This is our covenant with each other, to dwell together in peace, to search for truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning. Come with me into the music. Even before 1933, the Black Christian church was one of humanism's greatest miracles. And what we see in the songs, in the music especially, are the traces of a human people coming together and valuing as divine their own sense of community. This would be the way that the Black church would dignify itself so that it could prepare itself to go into the world and demand justice for itself and all people. That makes us cousins. We do the same thing. And so I invite you into the words of the Black church. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom. And let's think of freedom as a holy thing, like it is. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. One more time. Oh, I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, and it was stayed on freedom. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. And it was important then, as it is now, that in all of our going, in all of our journeying, we journey together. It will be hard, we know, and the road will be muddy and rough, but we'll get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Sing it with me. Wo-ya-ya, wo-ya-ya. One last time. Wo-ya-ya, wo-ya-ya. We've been called upon by our fellow community members to make a difference in the world by supporting Avalon Housing. Avalon Housing's mission is to build healthy, safe, and inclusive support and housing communities as a long-term solution to homelessness. We envision a community in which all of our neighbors have stable homes and an opportunity to thrive, and we share that with the mission of Avalon. Avalon Housing was created in 1992 as an emergency shelter in Ann Arbor, and now they've developed a nonprofit real estate development, property management, and service providing system. There is no lasting liberation in the world until everyone has what they need to be well, until everyone has what they need to survive. And so I welcome you to partner me and let our combined giving make a difference in the world through Avalon Housing. Let them be better for our generosity, and let us make a difference in the world hand in hand. UUAA.org/giving.
Sofia Valdez, Future Prez, by Andrea Beatty, illustrated by David Roberts. Sofia was a baby who got things done, helping her family before she turned 1. She and Abuela went out every week to help elderly friends around Blue River Creek who couldn't get out and about on their own, and with no place to gather, were stuck home alone. Raking the leaves, taking pets for a walk, or just dropping by for a treat and a talk, Sofia Valdez did as much as she could for her family and friends and her whole neighborhood. A dreamer, a doer, a real-life go-getter. Most people liked good, but Sofia liked better. Each morning, Abuelo walked Sophie to class. They walked home again along Blue River Pass. Making plans, munching cookies, Abuelo and girl, except for that Tuesday when Pup saw the squirrel. With a howl, Pup took off, racing all through the town, over, under, beneath, and around. Sophia scrambled to try to keep up with the hollering man and the bellowing Pup. Up the squirrel ran to the top of a hill made of leftover junk for the local landfill. They reached the tip-top of that mountain of trash, which jiggled and broke with an ear-splitting crash. Down they all tumbled and hit with a thud on a moldy old pumpkin surrounded by mud. "Ouch!" cried Abuelo. He struggled to stand. "A dangerous mess," he said, grasping her hand. The next day, Sofia walked to school solo, but it wasn't the same without her abuelo. "This is not right," declared young Sofia, who glared at Mount Trashmore and got an idea. The very next morning at dawn, she planted a sign at the front of the lawn. She stood back and smiled, and Pup gave a bark. "Get rid of Mount Trashmore. Let's build a new park." Each of her neighbors had something to say about benches and fountains and places to play, meeting spots, gardens, a basket for bees, a rubber duck pond, and a kiosk for cheese. She drew every thought on her map of the park, which was perfectly perfect by 1:15 dark. She drifted to sleep in her soft, cozy bed. Then, bam, she woke up when a thought smacked her head. Her heart skipped a beat as she realized each one of her neighbors had said, "Let me know when it's done." They all thought Sofia could build it alone. But how could one girl do so much on her own? The weight of that thought made her tender heart ache as night thunder growled and she lay wide awake. Then dawn brought a storm and the gloomy sky wept, and the heartsick Sofia finally slept. Abuelo baked cookies when Sophie got up. He gave her a bagful and sneaked one to Pup. He blinked back a tear as he hugged his Sofia. "For courage," he whispered. "Te amo, mi vida." Sophia's knees wobbled. She felt weak inside. She looked at his ankle and quite nearly cried. Though she didn't feel brave or courageous at all, Sofia Valdez went to face City Hall. The mayor's office sent her to room 401, the Blue River Creek Department of Fun, which sent her downstairs to room 302, the Office of Duck Ponds and Cool Things to Do, to the Office of Monkeys, the Department of Cheese, the Division of Fountains, and Meetings and Bees. Then down to the basement, so musty and cramped, where all the town's papers were sorted and stamped. And that's where the clerk said what no one else did. "You can't build a new park. You're only a kid." The words smacked Sofia deep down in her heart. Her plan was kiboshed before it could start. "I think," said Sofia, "I think that law's wrong." But her second grade voice didn't sound very strong. The clerk said, "Clearly, it cannot be done. Do you have any questions?" Sofia said, "One, if you were me and I was you, and he was your grandpa, what would you do?" Well, said the clerk. Then she said nothing at all. She thought and she thought. Then she sent out a call to every employee throughout City Hall. The entire government of Blue River Creek crammed into the office to hear Sophie speak. But her words jumbled up and her cheeks turned bright red as a dozen emotions rushed into her head. Her heart beat so loudly she thought it would crack. The crowd leaned in closer. Sofia leaned back. Then her arm brushed the edge of the old cookie sack. And that was the moment when Sofia first knew being brave means doing the thing you must do, though your heart cracks with fear, though you're just in grade 2. She took a deep breath, looked the mayor in the eye, and though her knees wobbled, she held her head high. Sofia started talking. She spelled out her plan and why it all mattered and how it began, and once she got rolling, she had lots to say about meeting spots, monkeys, and places to play, and other ideas for things they could do to help the town elders and other folks too. She had thoughts on the library, thoughts on the zoo, and perhaps a way to combine the two. And, "All right," cried the mayor. "Go start a petition. If the town wants a new park, we'll form a commission." And so young Sofia got right to work with some help from her family and Pup and the clerk. Then others joined in. Not all, but a few, like Miss Lila Greer and the kids in grade 2. There were hearings and surveys and taxes to figure, then bulldozers, cranes, and a blue, bigger digger. They all built that park. That's how it got done, with the hard work of, by, and for everyone. But it began with the dream of one person, just one, who laced up her shoes and then led the way to help Blue River Creek get a new place to play. Now, every evening till long after dark, the town comes together at Citizens Park. They all hold this truth to be self-evident, that Sofia Valdez could grow up to be president. Until then, Sofia, that real-life go-getter, helps Blue River Creek get better and better.
Such a beautiful story, that of Sofia Valdez. The spirit of humanism invites us to notice the potential, the capacity that we have as human beings, as we just saw in the story of Sofia. It also invites us to notice and step into our human compassion, compassion which is a feeling, and our ability to engage in care and service to one another, compassion embodied. It's in that spirit that I am so aware that many of you, as I have been, have likely been focused on and aware of much of the news of human suffering around our planet this past week as we continue this time of COVID pandemic. The suffering that's occurring in India, in Brazil, and new reports of Iran and Turkey facing similar stretching of their healthcare systems and real deep suffering of ordinary people. I would like to invite us to just take a moment to breathe together, to hold some silence together, to just bring into our heart and our being that feeling of human compassion and caring for our siblings on this planet. If you would join me in a brief moment of silence and reflection. May we continue to be as present as we can to the needs of our world, evoking in ourselves a commitment to be part of the love and healing that our world needs. It's my pleasure and with gratitude to be able to introduce to you today our special guest, Anthony Cruz, who will be sharing with us some of his experiences and perspectives. Anthony grew up in Puerto Rico, influenced deeply by humanistic ideas and understandings, grounded in his experiences of life there. Anthony came to the mainland US in 2016, completed a master's in theological studies at Andover Newton Theological School, and is currently at Meadville Lombard Theological School pursuing a master's in leadership studies with a focus on humanism. He is endorsed by the Humanist Society, which is the endorsing arm, adjunct body of the American Humanist Association. And he is a task force member of the clergy collective at the Susquehanna Valley Ethical Society. We are so grateful to have Anthony with us this Sunday, to have you with us this Sunday to share your experiences as a humanist. And we're going to have a little bit of a back and forth dialogue with Anthony this morning. I'm going to offer to Anthony my first question for him. And as you step into that, Anthony, if there's any other words of greeting or self-introduction you'd like to offer, please feel free to do that. Anthony, as we move into this time of shared reflection together, my first question for you, what are the perspectives that meaningfully inform your sense of being a humanist? Are there particular life experiences that inform your humanism? Are there particular thinkers, writers, philosophers who have inspired you? And this is meant to be more of a background, getting acquainted with you kind of question. Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Reverend Manish, for the introduction and for UUAA and the space this morning to engage in a dialogue, primarily celebrating, remembering, and honoring the work that it took to create the first Humanist Manifesto and the different signatories that made that possible. To answer the first question, first and foremost, my perspective is that we are all a global community. I think that that's the main root and the foundation of my humanism, as well as my humanist work from a more scholarly perspective, is that we are a community, even when we are aware of it or not, even when we live into those values, into that reality or not, it is part of our shared human experience, as well as the different opportunities of receiving formal or informal education, particularly from a humanist perspective, was very integral to my humanist development. As you mentioned, Manish, I've been in the States for a bit, but before officially moving to the mainland in 2016, I actually spent a year studying at the Humanist Institute under various professors, ministers, and thinkers. And it was there, as I was also completing my undergrad in anthropology, that I was really able to see the potentiality that humanism has to touch people's lives. And so it is actually through the companionship of different individuals in my life where humanism actually took form. Right? It moved from the philosophical exercise to seeing humanism embodied in other people. And so as we move further into the first question, I think that I'm just going to frame a little bit of what humanism means to me. In no way or form is this a must definition, but it is some of my own ruminations. I like to coin the term of liquid humanism. And part of that is because it helps for us to imagine that humanism cannot be held captive in its reifications or difference, but rather it's an invitation to a more capacious engagement of what it means to apprehend how difference is produced and how these relations of difference bear on humanism. At the same time, these liquid humanisms allow for us to conceive of humanism as processes of envisioning, where the plurality of the human experience is respectfully tentative, yet how can we take this process serious? As you asked about thinkers, I am reminded of Enrique Dussel, who's an Argentinian and Mexican philosopher as well as theologian. I think about Laura Perez, who's an ethnic and Latinx studies professor at UC Berkeley. Dr. Floyd Thomas, if I'm not mistaken, he's at Emory at the theology school. Dr. Pinn, who maybe most of us might know of if we're involved in the humanist world at all, and other people who, again, provide conversation partners for me. I think that's the, if I needed to summarize it, right, they all created the path. They, in their own experience, engage in philosophical, theological, and humanistic thought, thinking about what does it mean to experience our humanity in conversation with the wholeness of the world. right? And so as I look to embody, to create, to interrogate what is a form of humanism or free thought that is particularly rooted in an Afro-Caribbean perspective, I have to engage in this plethora of thinkers in order to be able to think in a different way and not necessarily just repeating what has been already said or thought, but trying to create a space where other people can think and see themselves in. And lastly, I would really have to say that the mentorship of Reverend David Breeden, as well as the friendship of Jay Hooper, who's an ethical culture leader, have been very instrumental in my own process since arriving to the mainland. Again, right, having a white minister who's a Unitarian Universalist and having an ethical culture brother and chosen family really helped me parse through my own processes of unfolding and becoming, right? Because part of engaging in humanist work is not just engaging the mind and the intellectual development, but it is actually how am I being in touch and in conversation with all of who I am, in order then to be able to engage in anything else of a philosophical conversation around what humanism is.
Anthony, I love that. I love your articulation of a liquid or fluid humanism, that one that can take shape to meet the needs of the time. It echoes what I shared from Karl Barth, the phrase "semper reformanda." Delighted to hear as well. I didn't know your connections with David Breeden. I've just been recently getting acquainted with his writing and work in an appreciative way. My next question for you: how do you experience humanism as a philosophy, as an approach that can help us with the current challenges and needs of our time? Over to you, Anthony.
Thank you, Manish. Yeah, I mean, I would say that in order for us to engage in current challenges and the needs of our time, I, again, would need to expand a bit on how can we reframe from a mere philosophical notion and consideration around humanism, and particularly borrow from the AHA and other thinkers that have stated that humanism is a life stance, right? Meaning that our life, however we define it, is being held in our experience. We must think ourselves into new material realities and possibilities, right? And in order for this to happen, that's an invitation for us to take action, right? So again, we engage with our own self, with our personhood, however we conceive it, however different tools or hermeneutical lenses allows us to think ourselves through, but not just that alone. It is a call to action, to go outside the books, to go outside the philosophical realm, and to look with appreciation and curiosity to the world outside the brick and mortar experience, which means that we have to be implicated in the socio-political, religious, and cultural endeavors, as these are viable options for a liberationist way of life, as you kind of referred to earlier, right? In our order of service, we must embody liberationist ways of life. And so that being said, some of the questions around what are some of the challenges that humanism or that we are facing in terms of engaging spaces, engaging community, engaging congregational spaces, some of those, at least in my own ruminations and work, has been, where are my trans siblings? Where are the gender non-conforming folks, right? Though all those that live outside of the transgressive, why do they need to create their own spaces? Why can we, as a humanistic communities, not be in dialogue and in conversation with these individuals that are part of who we are, right? They're part of the global community. If we look to our right or to our left in a more normative reality, right? What do we see? Do we see more of the dominant culture? Do we see more of a dominant particular group, way of thinking, way of living? Do we see a particular class, ethnic group, political ideology? Or do we see, like I said earlier in the first question, do we see plurality? Do we see diversity? Again, diversity not just in an ethnic, racial dimension, but diversity in all that can be and all that has not yet been, right? As we journey in the human experience and the different ways that these take shape and form and are expressed. And so for me, one of the challenges is, how are we challenging our canons? May that be within Unitarian Universalism, ethical culture, right? Whatever denominational space we are in or we hold dear, how are we challenging it in order to create space for others, in order to expand the reality of community, which means holding the tension of feeling uncomfortable, which means that the person might not quote, think, act in the way that we expect. But it is through our shared human experiences, through the relationality with other individuals, their sexualities, their genders, their political, religious experiences, or religious or spiritual journeys, right, that allow for revitalization of the space. And if we do not allow that to happen, then we are just becoming stagnant. We are just becoming a repetition, right, of something that was, that is no longer, but we are holding steadfast to it. We are saying we are holding down the fort and we are not going to allow for the new things to happen. And if I'm quoting the fourth point of the Humanist Manifesto, we have to interrogate our own biases and prejudice, because we have to understand, as it was stated on point 4, right, that if we look at the social sciences, if we look at the histories, right, and not just the histories from North American or European framework, but histories in terms of a global perspective, and who existed, who thought themselves into being before the North American or the European defined modern history, or the point from when history began to count according to the dominant structures, then we have to look at our environment, right? Not just from a naturalistic perspective, but in terms of our own institutions, our own communities, our own family structures, and say, yes, we are born into a particular culture. But if we look into what our reality is today, it's not just one culture, it might be a multiple sets of cultures that are already embedded in our humanist or just lived experience, right? Which means that the notions of family, education, and all these things are not just monologous, right? They're not just one expression, but that they're multiple. And how does that then transfer or is embodied in humanism, particularly, is one of the questions and challenges that I see.
I'm really enjoying this dialogue, Anthony. I literally this morning I was reflecting on the arc, particularly on the Unitarian side of the history of the Unitarian Universalism. There's been a constant movement, well over 150 years of expansion along the lines of who's included at the table. How are we evolving, expanding, and growing in ways that we are more inclusive around our expressions of who we are and who is in community with us. You spoke about that so beautifully. My third and last question for you, if you had a wish for the humanist movement, a forward-looking direction for it, what might that be?
Thank you so much. I think that this wish is going to be a little layered. But as you mentioned earlier, if humanism is the aspiration to ethical living and not just a philosophical exercise alone, then that means that we have to look to the embodied and the practical application of humanism, which means that, again, we have to challenge and critique our own understanding of what is humanism in its movement form, for example, meaning the AHA, meaning Sunday Assembly, right? Meaning the modern iterations of humanism, and not just humanism from a philosophical or book definition. I would have to say that part of my wish would be actually to look at different initiatives that points to the decolonization of ethics in ways that challenge the subculture of assimilation that has been really dominant, particularly within humanist, even congregational spaces. And some of the practices that these spaces have taken to heart or has become part of the fabric of the practices of community. My wish, for example, would be layered. It's not just one thing. One of the 3 layers that I am going to particularly talk about is we have to have a radical recasting and knowing of movement. Right? We call it the humanist movement as a form of an umbrella term, right? But we have to question and interrogate, what is movement? How do we define it? And is it possible for it to be a radical interest for the living conditions of others? Which at its foundational level means that we have to be interested in how we provide access and a sustainable learning environment for all of those that are within our immediate or extended family, systems, and so forth. Right? It means not just academic in a formal setting, but it means in terms of organizations. And so that calls forth an intergenerational relationality, as well as funding academic research projects to expand the well of knowledge and access of humanisms so that other people have the tools and the ability to be able to engage in dialogue with themselves, as well as within the different humanistic traditions. Particularly people of color that have not always had the opportunity to really have access to what is humanism, again, as we have framed it in this conversation in its modern, maybe North American or European notion and structures. And then lastly, if I had to sum up my wish, it would be for humanism to have a community-based orientation. That's the sum of it all. We have to really be oriented towards community, which means that we put all of who we are in service of each other and for each other. And particularly for those, again, like I mentioned earlier, that do not look, think, act, or behave as the dominant expression of humanism. But if we are not just to survive, grow, and be, if we are to really flourish, it means that we have to center the human condition from a polyvalent, multi-layered understanding. And from that conversation, from that reality, then we would be able to create the spaces and the social imagination for humanism to be appealing and to be a beacon as we love to quote, for the nuns, for the not affiliated, for those that have a hyphenated identity, right? Just to close, people ask me all the time, why do people still remain evangelical? Why do they remain Protestant? Why do they remain, fill in the blank? If clearly we live in a more scientific, more reasoned-based reality or societies. And part of my answer, it's obviously very complex, but in a very simple answer, it's because they are not just socialized, as we pointed to the fourth point, right? It's not just their culture, it's not just their sociocultural reality, but it is actually the way that they become. They see family, they see belonging, they see a network that is not just interested in their theological, religious, philosophical development, but who are implicated and deeply interested in supporting their journey of becoming, right? Which means that it doesn't matter how many times I screwed up, it doesn't matter in a way, and please don't take it the wrong way, how many times I transgress the social norms, I am welcomed back. Because again, it's through the space of being allowed to transgress, to make mistakes, to miss the mark, and being loved, being cared, being nurtured, that then we can realize, oh wait, it is through the learnings of life that then I am able to think, be, and embody my realities.
Anthony Cruz, our community's love and gratitude are with you. Thank you for being part of a very rich dialogue today. I certainly appreciated it very much. For those who already know and those who may be newer to our community, immediately following this live stream, we have some social time together. If you'd like to join us for that, you can go to www.uuaa.org/social hour. That link will take you directly into that space. If it's your early days of getting to know us, if you're still relatively new, if you identify that to a moderator when you join that space, they will support you accordingly. It's worth mentioning that next week, on May 9th, we will be live again, and joining us will be another special guest, internationally known, renowned author, a spiritual mentor and teacher of mine, Margaret J. Wheatley. We hope you'll join us as Meg Wheatley is with us next Sunday. As I, over here on my end, prepare to blow out my chalice, I invite you to do the same if you lit one at home. And I'm going to offer some words as we do so. I want to share with you as we close, these are the words of the 14th point of the Humanist Manifesto of 1933. This is my favorite point of the whole manifesto I'll share. And it's this point in its radical vision, not yet realized. It's still a relevant vision. This point led to the persecution, McCarthy-esque persecution of humanists in subsequent decades after 1933. Here, I invite you into these radical words of vision. Humanists are firmly convinced that our existing acquisition-based and profit-motivated society has shown itself to be inadequate, and that a radical change in methods, controls, and motives must be instituted. A socialized and cooperative economic order must be established to the end that the equitable distribution of the means of life be possible. The goal of humanism is a free and universal society in which people voluntarily and intelligently cooperate for the common good. Humanists demand a shared life in a shared world. May we hold that vision dear as we go forth in love, go forth knowing that you are held in the embrace of this community until we meet again.